So picture Northwest Arkansas in early March 1862. You're going to have rolling hills that look like a green postcard today, but back then, the mud threw an early season tantrum and turned every dirt track into a slimy, boot-sucking nightmare. Bare trees stood around like they literally had nothing better to do than become glorified speed bumps, while icy wind howled through the valleys like it personally hated everyone involved. And here, in this frozen Ozark fever dream, Union General Samuel R. Curtis perches right here on this high bluff like he's the ultimate playground bully who's finally king of the hill. And he's playing for keeps with artillery that could turn attackers into pink mist. And Confederates had just ran Brigadier General Franz Sigel out of Bentonville, and he's still chewing on his ham, but they failed to entrap him at the Y Junction back around Camp Stevens. So Curtis is dug in right here, behind the steep rocky bluffs of Little Sugar Creek. It's a spot military historians call formidable, but any sane person labels it like, yeah, hard pass on dying here, bud. Come see the rifle pits for yourself. They're on the Pea Ridge National Military Park, although it is a rarely visited site, and a short, steep hike is required to get up there. But they still look like they were carved by pissed-off miners 164 years later, etched into these sheer forested walls rising like natural fortresses. This is just on the other side of the valley, right over there, where Colonel Louis Hebert tried and spectacularly failed to make a stand at Dunnigan's farm. Every soldier and local yokel on both sides knew the score. Attacking Curtis here wasn't bravery. It's assisted suicide with extra steps. Even Van Dorn's ego took one look and said, yeah, not today. So a few miles west, near where Highway 72 and Little Sugar Creek Road meet today, Confederate General Earl Van Dorn struts here into Camp Stevens with the swagger of a guy who's not once checked the terrain report and who, by the way, spent most of the trip feverish in an ambulance like some Confederate drama queen before finally mounting up. Van Dorn was the type who embraced a bold plan with the death grip of a sick toddler on a venomous snake. He's feverish, headstrong, and too damn arrogant to let go even as the fangs set in. His Army of the West totaled roughly 16,500 men. It's the Civil War's version of hitting shuffle on a playlist that nobody asked for. You're going to have 8,000 Texans and friends under Benjamin McCulloch. He's a man so rugged, his beard would have doubled as thermal underwear. And about 7,000 Missourians under Sterling Price, whose hatred for McCulloch made two cats in the litter box look like besties. Plus, roughly 1,500 cavalry and auxiliaries, and these poor souls had staggered up through the Boston Mountains in an icy blizzard on a 3-day forced march, arriving hollow-eyed, starving, and questioning every decision that led them to an evening briefing at Camp Stevens on March the 6th. See, straggling was an epidemic. As one sergeant from the 3rd Louisiana put it, such a worn-out set of men I never saw. They had not one single mouthful of food to eat. That evening, right here at Camp Stevens, after McCulloch's cavalry confirmed Curtis's defensive line, Van Dorn called his generals together for what history politely calls a conference, but really, it's just a powder keg powwow. See, McCulloch, who actually knew the country, dropped the Bentonville Detour suggestion like it's the greatest tactical mic drop since Hannibal crossed the Alps. And for the first time in months, McCulloch and Price, those two mortal enemies who normally couldn't agree on the color of the sky, well, they suddenly sang in perfect harmony, and they're begging, for God's sakes, let the poor, worn-out, hungry soldiers rest tonight and attack fresh in the morning. And you know, come to think about it, when your bitter rival teams up with you to say, dude, these guys need sleep or we're all screwed, that might just be the universe hitting the emergency brake. Van Dorn listened. Oh yeah, he listened. And then he did the exact opposite, because apparently listening is just for quitters. And with the confident shrug of a man who'd argue with his own reflection and win, he declared, nope, we're marching tonight. And his idea sounded genius on paper. Don't frontal assault those bluffs like a drunk on roller skates, and instead, let's swing north on a backwoods goat path called the Bentonville Detour. It's a rough 8-mile trail loop around Curtis's right flank, and it's going to slice the Telegraph Road supply line to Missouri and smack the Union in the rear where Curtis was famously blind and inconvenient. Van Dorn's plan was pretty, but his execution? Hey man, look, it's comedy gold. Van Dorn builds massive lines of campfires right here, so Curtis thinks everybody's still tucked in for the night. Classic misdirection, if the rest of the plan hadn't been a dumpster fire. See, getting out of Little Sugar Creek Valley down here, that's pure nightmare. These icy creeks and steep banks, they got wagons floundering like drunk toddlers, artillery moaning like haunted furniture, and cannons, well, they're simply stuck. Harnesses get tangled. By midnight, some units hadn't even left camp. The cavalry, well, they're supposed to be scouting ahead, right? They're buried behind artillery and infantry, kind of like ice cream gets hidden behind frozen spinach. And who thought this order was a good idea? Probably, my guess, the same geniuses who think those Salt Life stickers belong in landlocked Arkansas. They tried the stealth route along what is now Ryan Road from its intersection with Little Sugar Creek Road to where it intersects with Highway 72 today. Right here, right along this stretch we're driving now, banking that these steep ravine walls are going to be Ozark noise camouflage. But nothing says Silent Night March like 16,500 exhausted men, squealing weapons and complaining cannons crunching on gravel, and infantry muttering curses so loud they'll wake the dead. Union pickets, well, they heard plenty, but reported back just enough for Curtis to go, it's probably nothing. Van Dorn's campfires, they're still burning back at Camp Stevens, and that screamed to Curtis that everything's normal, folks. Curtis basically heard his smoke alarm going off and decided it's just a drill. Except, it wasn't. So the Confederate route snaked through what is now modern-day Pea Ridge, and it hung a right and headed east at the Pea Ridge Square and continued along modern-day Pickens Road. Now, here we go. Enter the absolute hero of this entire pony show. Grenville Mellon Dodge was born April the 12th, 1831 in Danvers, Massachusetts, to a restless dad who drug his family around like they were bad luggage. Young Grenville hustled from age 10, doing farm work, butcher carts, bookstore gigs, produce sales, anything he could, just to fund school his parents couldn't afford. He clawed his way through Durham Academy, then Norwich Academy, and he graduated around 1850-51 with a civil engineering degree and a military tactics minor. Because, why not learn to build and destroy infrastructure in one go, right? So by 1855, he had landed in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and married Ruth Ann Brown. Started a family and turned himself into a frontier hustler, surveying railroads and flipping real estate, banking, freighting, partnering with slick operators like Thomas C. Durant. And he met Lincoln in 1859 and 60 and geeked out over transcontinental rails. He helped swing Iowa to a Republican state, and by early 1861, he's a wealthy, connected 29-year-old who's already ditched his businesses to go chase war glory. So basically, he's ready to pull the kind of unauthorized stunts that's going to make him a Pea Ridge legend. So late that afternoon, on March the 6th, Grenville Dodge was absolutely convinced that the Rebs were cooking up something shady. Sitting still clearly wasn't an option for him, so he rode on over to Pratt's store to find Sam Curtis, and he politely suggested, hey, maybe we don't leave our back door wide open, Dodge's brilliant cutting-edge idea? Well, hey, let's throw up some roadblocks on the Bentonville Detour, just in case an entire Confederate army decided to come strolling through like it owned the freaking place. Curtis, meanwhile, he's still locked into this "we're definitely getting attacked from the south" theory, like a man who's already printed the map and refusing to update it. But even he had to admit, roadblocks are cheap, and getting surprised by an army? That's not. So Curtis, well, he basically looks up from his maps, gives the most gloriously casual wave-off in military history, like, sure, dude, go play in the woods, knock yourself out, man. So Dodge, he doesn't need to be told twice. He grabs 6 companies, mostly from the 4th Iowa, axes in hand, and races northwest as darkness fell. He goes full beaver mode and turned the Bentonville Detour into the world's angriest game of pickup sticks. No engineers, no diagrams, just soldiers felling trees like it's Black Friday at a lumber yard. And Dodge's first roadblock, well, it's just past 12 Corners Church. And McCulloch, he's quite familiar with this church, not because he goes to church there, but because he used the church as his headquarters not much earlier. And it had to be one of the most interesting church names in 1862, right? And it still is. The original church was actually shaped like a cross, which sounds meaningful and symbolic, right up until somebody decided to name it like they'd just discovered geometry for the first time. Cross-shaped building? Hey, perfect. Let's count the corners here. So instead of a nice normal name like Cross Church, they went full math class and landed on 12 Corners Church, as if the congregation was one chalkboard away from assigning homework with the sermon. Somewhere along the way, no one bothered to raise a hand and say, hey guys, I think we might be overthinking this. But that's exactly how a perfectly reasonable design turned into a name that still makes people pause and go, wait, 12? But anyway, it's right here, just past 12 Corners Church, where the Confederates slammed into the first barricade around midnight. Trees felled only hours later, trunks toppling across the narrow road in the freezing dark, and it's blocking everything like nature's roadblock from hell. Exhausted Confederates hit fresh-felled lumber still oozing sap, hacking with whatever pocket tools they had. 2 solid hours of lumberjack cosplay right here in the dark. Surefire way to dull a bayonet. Van Dorn, still feverish and snarling, he pushes them on like, damn these trees. Chop through them, man. We're not stopping for Yankee lumberjacks here. And then they staggered forward, straight into barricade number 2 right before dawn, right along this stretch of the road here, a couple miles farther east past the church, and the terrain on this spot looks like a prime location for that second roadblock. And another 2-hour axe party in the freezing night. It's colder than the one before, and men are dropping out in squads of 50 or 60 to sleep on the roadside from pure hunger and fatigue. I wouldn't have been surprised if some young private, half delirious from marching and the other half maddened from whatever the weather was trying to prove, had briefly came to just long enough to mumble the one line every parent dreads, "Are we there yet?" Which is impressive, because the morale was so low that somebody had to look up to see rock bottom. But the answer, Private, no, you're not. Not even emotionally. So this column had stretched 8 miles long. It's like the world's worst parade, with misery as the grand marshal, mud as floats, and a stench that could have had its own honorary unit. So after hacking through Dodge's roadblocks, the column continued down 12 Corners Road and turning into Gan Ridge Road, and then began turning north on what is now Jones Trailer Park Road. And then it turned east along Corinth Road until it intersected with the Telegraph Road. And so by sunrise on March the 7th, Price's Missourians had finally staggered onto Telegraph Road right up here, a couple miles north of Elkhorn Tavern. They brushed aside some startled Union patrols and pickets, and Van Dorn, still feverish, he thinks he's got it made. Sorta kinda. Mostly out of the mud. He's already daydreaming about his glorious pincher move. But here's where his math spectacularly failed. He thought McCulloch's Texans were right behind him. They weren't. McCulloch's division was still several miles back the detour, and they had just passed 12 Corners Church. And they're clogged worse than a Black Friday checkout line thanks to that creek crossing debacle over Little Sugar Creek near Camp Stevens at the onset of the march. And Van Dorn made the call that belongs in every How Not to General textbook. He splits his army in half because, one disaster clearly isn't enough for Van Dorn. Price would push south down Telegraph Road towards Elkhorn Tavern and the Union's rear. McCulloch? Nah, man, turn around, backtrack a bit, take the Ford Road shortcut just west of Big Mountain, and we're going to link up at Elkhorn Tavern. That branch off happened right here near 12 Corners Church, that historic trace McCulloch took east on Ford Road. Historians figured it was the military equivalent of Hold My Beer. Meanwhile, Curtis, the guy who'd treated the earlier noises like an annoying neighbor's rooster, he finally clocked that the rumbling wasn't ghosts. See, scouts from Elkhorn Tavern were flailing about Confederates eyeing supply wagons like kids at a candy store. Messengers, well, they confirmed McCulloch's columns are slinking down Ford Road, and Curtis, well, he didn't freak out. He didn't charge blindly, and he didn't set his boots on fire either. No, he just adjusted. Kind of like opening an umbrella when the sky opens up and it actually starts to rain. So Van Dorn wanted dawn glory, but instead he got an 8-mile traffic jam, half an army, and a master class in why you don't leave your axes at home. But the real show is just about to start. While Price's Missourians slammed Elkhorn Tavern right here, McCulloch's delayed Texans, they swing east on Ford Road straight into Osterhaus's waiting forest in the misty fields and timber around Foster's Farm and Oberson's Field. And that, my friends, is where the Battle of Leetown explodes. It's a bloody, confused slaughter in the woods that would claim McCulloch's life and shatter the Confederate command, and turn Van Dorn's brilliant flanking masterpiece into the kind of disaster that makes historians wince 164 years later. Stay tuned, folks. The axes are down, but those bullets are about to fly.